We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Terry Roberts. He is the Vice President of Employment Law and Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer at American Eagle Outfitters. Terry, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little about yourself, including your pronouns for our audience, and also when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Thanks for having me. So it's he, him, his. And that's funny you should say that. So I've probably bounced around a few careers in my life in terms of what I thought I wanted to be. Probably my earliest career path would have been, like many young boys in Pittsburgh, to be a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. However, God blessed me in many ways. He did not bless me in the type of NFL size, speed, and strength needed to actually maintain that career. And, my next would have been teaching. So my parents, who have always been my greatest influence and my biggest heroes, were both teachers. And so that was my next potential calling. And I will say this, even though I'm not technically a teacher, I believe most of the things I do in my jobs, whether it be with employment law or DEI, have a huge teaching component. And so in that way, I guess you could say I've somewhat turned out the way I hoped that would.
Absolutely. I would also say teaching is a large part, and educating and programming is a large part of your job, at least how we've talked about it in our previous conversations. And I know you mentioned a little bit about your kind of personal journey to this work, but Terry, what else would you say defines you as a person?
Yeah, probably a few things. I would say, like many people, we're pretty multifaceted. One thing about me is I care very deeply about things. That can be a blessing and a curse,
right.
But I also think it's almost necessary to make things happen, both in your life, your personal life, in your career. And some of the other things, I don't believe in coincidences. Take that for what take that for what it is. I do think everything has a cause. Everything happens for a reason, and that also helps to guide what I do. And then I'm just someone who questions everything, which is probably not surprising for someone who turned out to be a lawyer. But I question everything, which can get somewhat annoying to friends and family sometimes, and in particular my kids. But it's really an amazing way to not only transform your life but others, because you start to get down to the core reasons for why people do things or why things happen, and that's really the only way you're going to make progress.
Yeah, I think questioning and asking those curiosity-based questions is important, and understanding the context, the why. I'm sure in your work in inclusion and diversity and employment law, and working at a large enterprise organization with corporate employees, field employees, people all over the geography.
The world. Yeah, it's exactly.
Thinking about company culture and what that means. It's living, breathing, asking a lot of questions. What are kind of qualitative and quantitative ways you think about measuring the progress of the culture and where you are today?
So what we did for the first time was have a inclusion specific survey that was separate and apart from a general culture survey, and it talked about things like belonging, things like equal opportunity, things about sort of how they're interacting in the company, how they feel about the company and their future within the company. And by doing that and letting people to not only rate but also comment, and I was saying that when you give people the opportunity to comment and they feel comfortable doing so, you see it coming, you see it come out. And that's the type of information anyone needs for you to understand not only where you are, but what are some of the things you can do to make it even better. And inclusion is not an all or nothing endeavor. It's definitely a spectrum. And so that's important just to understand that you're never inclusive or non-inclusive. You're you're hopefully getting better and making people feel included, or you need to do some things so that you can get better with that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always ways that we can improve and make sure that our processes are inclusive, make sure that we as individuals are inclusive, the organization from a systemic lens too. You mentioned kind of really looking at the feedback, seeing where we can improve and continue to build upon company culture, especially as new people continue to join the organization as well. From your perspective, how can organizations identify, quote unquote, those kind of hidden dangers for company culture, like toxic managers or even miscommunicated or misaligned goals or values of a department, and proactively find them by empowering employees to really speak up?
I mean, that's a deep question. A lot of companies of our size will have things like a hotline. They'll have an open door policy. A code of ethics. All of those things are extremely important. At the end of the day, what makes those tools extremely helpful and useful is when you as a company, and that really gets down to the people, can somehow build trust that, I can come to the company, people within the company, and let them know how I feel. And they know it's coming from a place of wanting to help the company, right? We might not all agree. I tell people, I might not see the same things you see. I don't question what you're feeling, but the key is, are we both trying to get to the same place? Do we both have that same intention to make sure that AEO is the type of place that people want to work? When we talk about toxic managers, I'll say this: I think toxic is probably one of the overused words of like 2020 and 2021. That being said, a lot of it is about, don't close your eyes to what you're seeing. Don't put your finger in your ear because you don't want to hear what's being said. It's very important that people want to hear the feedback and then listen. And I think when you do that, what you start to see is, okay, what are the things that we need to do to help not only associates, but managers learn how to interact with each other, learn how to respect each other, and learn that we as a company do not want toxic managers. Are not good for business. I think they are not good for business, and there's no company that thinks that. The importance is making sure that people understand what being a good professional, what being a respectful person in the workplace looks like. And I think that's where a company needs to show role modeling. They need to be very clear in what being good looks like, and that being a good person, being respectful, being inclusive is good for business.
Absolutely. It's a business imperative. It's not just a nice to have, but it's a need to have in the long run to create a sustainable place where folks feel like they can do their best work too. And you mentioned the word learn a lot, which I think you're right. And not being a binary, you are inclusive, so you're done with the work, or you're not.
Yeah, right.
This is where you need to go. That's not how it works. And I know we talked about this too, of just, okay, to do this work, you have to acknowledge, where are we as people, where are we as an organization? So from your perspective, especially as a key kind of leader within AEO, where is American Eagle Outfitters on the equity journey of, again, an enterprise organization?
So I don't want people from other companies get mad at me, but I think everybody's really early in the process. I think regardless of who you are. And I know there are many that are, well beyond sort of what American Eagle Outfitters is at this moment. But I think what's exciting about AEO is that, number one, we're on the journey. We're in the car. We are driving.
Yeah.
And I think finally, obviously as a company, as a country, or other things, I think there's just a greater acknowledgement that equity is important. And I think that's one of the first steps, because then you start to hopefully look at your job, look at your decisions through a lens of equity.
Right.
I try to lower the bar in terms of not getting people too wrapped up in, PhD like terms and things you got to read a 10,000 page book on, or listen to 30 podcasts to understand. Equity at its foundation is about fairness. And that's something that, a 2-year-old gets, right? If you give one 2-year-old a big popsicle and the other one a little one, at some point they start saying, what's going on?
Right.
And I think, where I would want to really make sure that we get better at it, AEO, and like I said, it's an ongoing thing, is now that fairness and equity is a thing. It's a thing that the company cares about. It's a thing that's going to make us a stronger and better company. Now you got to do the work of when something happens, when you're looking at a policy, when you're making a decision, when you're analyzing two options, that you're thinking through that lens of equity, right? You've gotten to the point where a lot of people start to look at a picture and they say, well, that's not very diverse. Well, guess what? 20 years ago, you just looked at the picture and you kept it moving. Now you say, okay, I look at that picture. Where's the diversity? Does it look like everyone feels included in the picture, or some people hiding in the background? How is this fair? Does everyone have the same type of opportunity, right, to be seen in the picture, right? So it's a lot about thinking about how are we looking at the situation, filtering these concepts, because that's when all of a sudden you start saying, wow, I didn't realize, I didn't see it. Now I can make a change in my decisions. Now I can make some actions that actually move the needle.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Recognizing that equity is about fairness. It's about those questions, those reflective questions when you are in your day-to-day processes, no matter what department or what role you have as well, and really seeing that and saying, okay, how can I make a difference here? What could we be doing differently as well? So now we're at the part of the journey where, you see that equity is really important. You want to make a difference. And then you want to see, okay, on a systemic level, are we making a difference as an organization, as leaders? Again, knowing that we are not fans of box checking here, but we know that what gets measured gets invested in, it gets done. What's your philosophy around measuring the success of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives?
Wow, so these are great questions, and they're very deep, and they're very difficult, because I don't think that they're black and white answers. Do I think you have to measure things? Yes. Does measurement mean that you're measuring the right things? No. Does measuring mean that you couldn't create some negative incentives, that you couldn't come from a good place, but it actually have a negative result? That's also possible. And so I think what you have to do is understand the limits of measuring, and then think about what for your organization the measuring is meant to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think at a very baseline, measuring should give you hopefully an indication that what you specifically are trying to do in your company is showing some positive signs, or does it reflect that maybe what we're doing isn't necessarily working to the degree which we would want it to work? I think you might get in trouble when you use measurement so that people on the outside will feel a certain way about you, or that or that you're sort of virtue signaling in some way. We're a good company and see what we've done. I think ultimately measurement is about first self-accountability, right? To say, okay, is what we're trying to do possibly gaining some roots and showing some growth and some progress? Because if you haven't at least put that on paper and started to measure, it's really hard to know if that that 3-inch tree is now 5 inches, 7 inches, a foot, right? Or how quickly are we growing since last year? Or have we really grown a lot in the last year? So we could say, what did we do last year that may have helped to create this growth, right? And so I think that's where measurement is truly important. It's not a goal in and of itself, right? It's not simply that, okay, we're going to measure this, and all we care about is making sure the numbers look better next year. Because when you do that, you'll get a lot of people who will clap and people will say you're great. And then everyone on social media will get off your back and it'll be, oh, this is great. Well, but are you necessarily doing things that, number one, are going to last for 10, 20 years? Are they things that are sustainable? Are they things that are going to create such dissension within your ranks in the company because people don't like the how in what you're doing?
Right.
That is actually going to create possibly an actually toxic environment for people, including, for instance, people of color or marginalized communities. So I think it's a difficult question, but I think it's not about doing it for its sake or others. It's you've got to understand, we got to measure this so if I can know whether or not what we're doing is possibly doing some good and working.
Absolutely. And on one hand, it's understanding that equity is about fairness, like you were talking about, having, the caring and the intentionality behind it, but that's not enough. It's about the actions. And then you do have to some point have to measure kind of your success there, hold ourselves accountable, ask the big questions, but not over rely on metrics to tell the full story and say, okay, pat ourselves on the back. We did a great job here. It goes back to questioning as well, and to your earlier point of, why are we measuring this? Do we need to continue to measure this? Do we need to check in? All of those questions.
Because the reality is, I say this is a monster of a job. It's a monster of a job. I tell people most good things are very, very difficult. Most things that are worthwhile are very difficult. You're going to fail much more than you succeed. And it's actually when you have those types of issues that wow, I may actually be doing something that's going to make a difference in this world. Because if it was easy, it would already been done. If it was easy, it was already been resolved. And so I think part of it is understanding the difficulty in the work, and also having grace on ourselves, but also others, to know that this stuff is hard, it's difficult. And that's part of the reason why it's so important to be so committed to it, because only through commitment are you going to actually be able to make the strides that I think most of us and most of your listeners, I'm sure, are looking for.
Absolutely. You have to be truly committed to this work and really have that growth mindset, and really test things as well. I know one of the kind of hardest parts, especially for folks at different parts of their internal and individual equity journey, is having really hard and vulnerable conversations at work with your team, with coworkers. It's hard, especially if you don't know the answer, you do, and you feel like you need to educate others, or whatever part of the spectrum you are on there. How does AEO really create space for these intentional and vulnerable conversations? I think you mentioned kind of working with Joyce Bender and talking about the disability advocacy space. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, that's somewhere where I think I don't know the answer to sort of creating those great spaces. I do think it's about, we think about bringing people in to talk to people like a Joyce Bender, and talking about, persons with disabilities, people that are truly, I think, one of the last groups that are just without stigma, sometimes discriminated against, not given opportunities. They are a group that talk about intersectionality. All of us, certainly have the ability, to be within that community. And it's one of those deals where first vulnerability comes from understanding that we ultimately are interconnected, part of the same community. And it's important for us to understand what others are dealing with, and embracing that. I think it's less about sometimes creating, quote, the space physically or in that way, but more about creating the mindset to allow people to feel comfortable stepping out into what I tell people is and should be a very scary place. A lot of times, particularly in our world, we say, you've got to lean into being uncomfortable. You got to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. But then I'm like, yeah, that's easy to say.
Yeah.
But it is scary. There's a lot of risk in having these conversations in the workplace or even in your personal life, right? There is a lot of risk. And I think we shouldn't downplay this. What I told somebody yesterday is it's the equivalent to me of investing. So, I invest in the stock market and for retirement, not because I don't think putting my money in the markets is risky. I know it's risky. I know I could lose a bunch of money at some point. I know there will be ups and downs, but you know what's riskier? Just putting my money underneath my mattress. And the thing about it is not trying to say there's no risk or we might not get knocked down or I might have a really bad day or I might say something that's going to put me in a really bad spot, because you might. But the difference is if you don't have these conversations, if you don't do this, what happens is you get a false sense of where you are. And just like if you put your money underneath your mattress, you're right. If you put $10,000 under your mattress today, you're going to have $10,000 under your mattress in 50 years. And you can say, well, look, I didn't lose anything.
Yeah.
You did. Because the fact of the matter is, if you put in those investments where you know you're going to have the ups and downs, you know you're going to get knocked down sometimes, you know it's going to be risky, you're going to wake up in 50 years with $500,000 from that 10 grand, right? And so I think that's where people need to, and even the people in this industry that have the good intentions, just keep it real with people. Yeah, this is scary. It's a little risky, but let me tell you something. The risk is worth it. The risk is worth it for you. The risk is worth it for your career, the company, the people that you manage, because ultimately those relationships, which you gain, are really going to create the growth that you want. And so we got to get better at that. But it's something I'm passionate about, but it's something that we are going to continue to try to give people some tools and give them that mindset. And it's also about giving both sides, like I said, a lot of grace. I think in today's world, everybody's on opposite sides fighting each other. Give each other a little grace and understand if we're both hopefully trying to get to a somewhat similar place, that we can go through some of those rough patches, because when you get out the other end, that's where the magic is.
Yeah, absolutely. Love a good investment analogy as well, to really visualize that, and also understanding that two-way conversation, really giving yourself and others grace in these conversations can't be said enough. In terms of like the workplace being a microcosm of society and the community, and really equipping folks, especially managers, to have these really hard conversations with people, do you think that it's a requirement for employers today to really invest in managers and teach them to really have that kind of skills or mindset, as you were talking about, to kind of open up those vulnerable conversations with their team members?
I think it is. And it's something that both managers and associates have come to us saying that they want help and they need help.
Yeah.
We put some things together and some like, hey, here's some tips and toolkits. It's probably not enough. We got to do more. But I think where I was telling my team yesterday, it's just a good timing, is that what I think we probably need to do is maybe even take a more one-on-one approach. And I know that's really hard in a big company like ours. It's probably even harder when you think about much larger companies than ours. But I think at some level, trying to identify people, and maybe it is identify certain people who have maybe an oversized influence in the company or are able to connect with a lot of different people. So it's almost like teaching the teacher. But at the end of the day, I do think you got to get to that level where you tell people these difficult conversations. I mean, it's not sort of like oh, you've got to be an expert. And that's where I think we get it wrong. You got to be expert in social justice or racism or whatever. That's not what it is. Difficult discussions are difficult discussions. I don't care if you're talking about whether or not, you had a case of a police shooting, or you had, a difficult, issue with policy, whether it be like a controversial topic, right? Whether it be COVID or abortion, whatever it is, right? At the end of the day, it's not that you have to be a subject matter expert in what you're saying. Mm-hmm. The skill is being able to listen, not be defensive, have some grace, be willing to listen to the other person, be willing to see different sides of an issue. Not necessarily that you're going to change your mind, but to respect the person enough on the other side to listen and say, you know what? I'm just going to go on a limb and not just dismiss you as crazy, right? I'm going to say, you know what? Especially you're in my workplace. We hired you for a reason. So I'm thinking that you could probably put two thoughts together. It might just be that you have good points, I have good points. And so let's talk to each other as human beings, as opposed to sort of, sort of non-human forces that can't give in, right? And so that's what I want to do, is less about sort of teaching people, this is what you need to get a certification in a DEI course so you can have these conversations. It's more like, hey, you got to have difficult conversations throughout your life, whether it be with your coworkers, your family, your friends, your kids, people out on the, on the street, going into a store. Somebody who calls you. That's how you gauge sort of, I think, the success is if you can get people to latch on to some core principles. And that's going to be something that I told my team I want to do more of on a personal level, to go along with some of these sort of broader, tools and videos and other materials we've given, managers about, having difficult conversations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that understanding that everybody is coming with different experiences and backgrounds, lived experiences as well, and not expecting the other person to have a, PhD in definitely makes a lot of sense to me. How can we kind of hold leaders accountable, again, at every level and every sense of the word that leader means of the organization, to really have and practice and continue to practice this equity-driven mindset?
Okay, if you figure that out, let me know. And I'm sure some of your listeners have some incredible ideas. I think at some level, accountability and be able to measure that and determine that, comes from, when you think about a leader, is talking to the people that they lead, right? Because I think that's a real easy way. Maybe easy, maybe it's simple, maybe it's not easy. Way to understand is whether or not that leader is actually embodying and putting in action the principles that the company wants them to, or that they're sort of espousing that they do, right? So if I'm able to talk to the people that they lead, and I say, hey, is Christina fair? They might, you can start to get an idea. Well, yeah, one thing I love is that she doesn't ask us to do anything that she wouldn't be willing to do, right? Mm-hmm. Is she inclusive? definitely. Like she makes sure that when we have a meeting, that everyone gets to open up and talk and have, and that their ideas aren't dismissed. And I think the accountability really then comes from, okay, number one, are we asking the people who ultimately the leader is accountable to, right? So
Right.
I'm a leader, I'm accountable to people. I always tell them it's a privilege to be a leader, right? But it's like I'm accountable to the people that I quote or I'm leading. And so the first people you should go to determine whether or not I'm doing my job are the people I'm leading, the
Right.
people that I'm responsible for.
Mhm.
And then it's a matter, and this is just a hard truth as a company, when you think about accountability, is determining sort of what's most important to you and whether or not it's like sometimes you got to just throw this person out if they're not a good leader. Do you need to invest in that person to make them a better leader, right? Do you need to work with them? So I think, and that's one, and that's also a spectrum. But I think, ultimately people know you're asking the questions and you're willing to take the action necessary, right? So if it's something horrible and egregious, get the person out of there if they're not doing what they're supposed to. But
Right.
if what it is they're a human being that just ain't that good at a lot of stuff that human beings aren't good at, let's try to do what we can to make that better. And then that will also prove to the people that are being led that you're holding that person accountable for what they're doing.
Right, absolutely. Asking the team that the leader or the manager is accountable to is a great way to kind of keep a pulse on that as well and see, okay, again, asking those curiosity-based questions, providing the context and the why behind why people are feeling this way in terms of kind of feedback. I'm sure over the past couple of years, and especially the last 2 years, people have had a lot of feedback
Yeah.
for you, the organization, for managers. Can you share an example of how employee feedback has informed or inspired a change in policy, strategy, or initiative at AEO?
Yeah, so I could probably, I don't know. There's a lot of probably great examples, but certainly after during 2020, um, I think there was a real focus by a lot of associates, and that's what we call our employees. That's just our vernacular, um, about a whole host of things that they want to see, and they give us like 30 things they wanted to see. I'm the type of person where I'm like, I ain't doing 30 of these, 25 of these, right? But 5 of these, I think, were both as a company and like but you consider everything, right? Because once again, I think it's important because there's always good stuff in everything. Like someone can give you what you think is the wildest idea, but let me tell you something. There's always something within that, and so one thing we got was certainly a desire for instance, um, communication, right? Like I think people always want more communication and transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happens is, and I'll tell you, this has always been a weakness of mine, is that I actually don't like promoting anything. I don't like, it's not that, it's not a matter of trying to keep things under wraps or do it. It's like, you know what? I just, sometimes I just want to put my head down and just go to work. Well, I said, well, no, like what you have to understand is I have the privilege of being in the room and seeing this or that or doing this or that, and so that was one of the things where you get this feedback. It's like, no, we want to know more, we want to see more, we want to understand what's going on. And so all of a sudden, you gotta sort of, say, okay, Terry, wake up. It's not all about you. And then you start putting together like a lot of different avenues and ways in which you can communicate to associates, right? And so that's one thing that I've seen sort of huge change from sort of pre 2020. And I think it was not only Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, but it was also the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is that, all of a sudden you've gotten more outlets to communicate. We have more tools. We have a inclusion diversity channel on on an app that we can get out to associates. We have, an email box. We do all, so there's all these things. So I know that's like just a small example, but it's you gotta listen to the people, because it's like it's not that necessarily you have bad ideas or your direction's bad, but who are you doing it for? You ain't doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
You're doing it for the people. And so if they're telling you, hey, we want to know more, we want to hear more, that doesn't mean that they might not, they might still not be happy with, they might want to know everything. Well, you might not, you might not be able to tell them everything, but I guess I tell you what, you can probably tell them a lot more than you have been, right? Exactly. And so I think that's where you got to understand and be able to say, it's not, I might not be able to give you exactly what you want, but you are hitting a nerve, which I think is important. And I think and we got to make sure that we are serving you as well. And so I think once you start having that mindset, you start taking that feedback to heart and figuring out, how can we get to the core of what this feedback is about? And what if it's about people want to know what's going on, so that they can also even feel empowered and feel some ownership of what's happening, that you just figure out a way to do that. So that's just one example. Like you said, people are very opinionated in this space, but it's really about saying, you know what, let's take every single proposal as a potential, as having some potential nuggets within them, that's going to make this a better company, that's going to make the relationship between the company and the associates better. If you have that mindset, you'll probably do a lot of good things.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good mindset to have in terms of meeting in the middle, providing that context. Why are people asking for these 25 different things as well? How can we ensure that people feel like we are hearing them, actively listening, having that conversation too, showing grace on both sides, all the things that we have been discussing as well. Here in the United States, February 2022, it is Black History Month. I know AEO is a global organization, but definitely wanted to ask, I'm located in Brooklyn, in the Clinton Hill area. How is AEO honoring and celebrating Black History Month this year? Also with the kind of note or asterisk that we should be celebrating Black employees 365 days a year, but I definitely want to ask.
No, yeah, it's a cool way to look at it. So I always say, when I think about Black History Month, the one thing I want to do is focus on, there's a lot of pain and suffering and bad stuff going on. Yes. I tell my team, Black History Month is about celebrating, recognizing, and really honoring the amazing accomplishments of peoples throughout the world. We call it the African, the diaspora, right? Where it's, you have Black people across the world, and how can we really make sure people understand the amazing contributions of Black people? And because, it's so easy to just get wrapped up in sort of, the struggle and sort of where there are gaps. And I say, I'll tell you why where the importance is not necessarily for Black History Month is in the gap, is looking back and saying, despite what has been unfortunately imposed on people of African descent, sort of throughout history, show how those people have overcome and succeeded despite, that's the beauty, that's what should be recognized. And then showing that, when you think about culture, you think about food, you think about education, politics, talk about I would say, particularly in the United States, Black people have had a disproportionate impact to their population in those areas. And so, for instance, AEO is trying to highlight that. We put out things essentially every week, actually probably a couple times a week, talking about not only historical things, but also, hey, Black culture, Black food,
Yeah,
Black achievement, Black business, right? Like here's how you can support Black business. It's not simply just because you shouldn't support Black business is all the time,
sure.
but it's really about saying, hey, we know there have been a lot of things that stood in the way of participation of many people in the economy in the same way as others. So we're actually doing a job of recognizing and celebrating that perseverance, right? Through identifying and being some, and and encouraging people to, you know, participate in the success of these businesses. And the last thing I'll say on that is, um, Harlem's Fashion Row, which is a really cool organization that helps to promote like incredible Black designers. Brandis Daniel, I just want to give a shout out to her. She's one of my sort of favorite external people. We actually met her in for another time in person in Brooklyn, like in the
Nice,
fall. Me
nice.
and my teams, like they're doing crazy. They're doing amazing things. They have like a Black History Summit. A Black History Month Summit for fashion design this month. And so for the first time, we were sponsored last year, and we're doing it in this year, where we're just highlighting and just hopefully putting a spotlight on incredible Black designers, not because it's going to really have any, sort of impact necessary on AEO business, but just simply because, we say, look, these are incredible artists. These are incredible people. I do think it's awesome when a global company with some wherewithal can at least put a spotlight on folks like that. So those are a few of the things we're doing with Black History Month.
I love that. Spotlighting, highlighting, celebrating, acknowledging the historical context behind all of these achievements is really important. It sounds like AEO is really committed to celebrating that, naming and highlighting folks as well. Terry, we talked about a lot of different topics in regards to company culture, your philosophy around diversity, equity, and inclusion, your journey to this work. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or perhaps underscoring one or two key takeaways? I know one for me is showing yourself and others grace and kind of, having that growth mindset, but wanted to pass the mic to you.
Yeah, I'll just leave with that. I just hope that we can all find some beauty and humanity in each other, and realize that in today's day and age where everything seems like a fight, and everybody wants to act like they know and have all the answers, that the most authentic thing you can do is let people know that we don't have all the answers. We're trying to get this. Everyone's trying to get this right, and so that ultimately get up every morning, God willing, and and see how you can make a positive impact, you know, not only in your life, but probably more importantly, the lives of the people you interact with. Um, and at the end of the day, you might have taken some hits, you might have fallen down, you might have gone backwards even. But hopefully, if you keep at it, we'll make this world a slightly better place for all of us.
Yes, I think that is a great kind of message for listeners as well. I think we all have the opportunity to make a positive impact in our lives and the lives of others, with that reflection, with that healthy questioning as well. Terry, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon. I really enjoyed our conversation.
This is awesome. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in the employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.